This is an outcome of WRI-India's flagship work on approaches to doubling farmers' income, agroecological based considerations. Uh, I would also like to take this opportunity to introduce our panelists to the audience here. So we have a diverse group here. We have Dr. Siraj Hussain, who is a 1979 batch IAS. He's worked as Chairman cum Managing Director, Food Corporation of India, and served as Secretary in the Ministry of Food Processing Industries and Ministry of Agriculture. He's currently Advisor, Food Processing, FICCI, and a Trustee of the World Food Programme Trust for India. Dr. Suvarna is an Indian Forest Service officer. She served as CEO, National Fisheries Development Board till recently, and is currently the Principal Chief Conservator of Forests, Harita Haram, Government of Telangana. She's also serving as member and gender expert in Australian Council of International Agriculture Research. Mr. Jagjit Sareen is the principal and co-leads Global Climate Practice at Dalberg Advisors, New Delhi. Jagjit has served as Assistant Director General at the International Solar Alliance and also as Senior Policy Officer in the Global Climate Practice at the World Bank headquarters. We also have Mr. Swapan Mehra, who's the Founder and Chief Executive Officer, IORA Ecological Solution. He's an environmental finance and climate policy expert and has contributed to some of India's pivotal policy documents, including India's long-term low emission development strategy, NDC Goal 5 roadmap, etc. We have Mr. Naveen Horo, who's with the GIZ as Natural Resources Manager in Agroecology. He's been part of some seminal works, including feasibility study of voluntary carbon markets for sustainable land management and soils as carbon sink. He's been part of project around urban value chains across multiple countries as well. I extend a very warm welcome to all the experts on the panel. Before we move on to the presentation of the study outcomes, which will be presented by Dr. Madhu Verma, who's ex-chief economist, WRI India. May I please request Mr. Madhav Pai, Chief Executive Officer of WRI India, to kindly launch the working paper titled Transforming the Yardstick Used to Measure Benefits from the Farm Sector, Moving Beyond Per Hectare Yield. So we're making a case for shifting the focus from production-oriented approach to more holistic systems approach. We are starting with the study presentation. I'm sorry. So that will be followed by the panel discussion. So I'll now hand over to Dr. Madhu Verma, who's currently Senior Economic Advisor at IORA and is ex-Chief Economist at WRI India. She's worked across ministries and state departments, and many of her suggestions have been internalized in policy, institutions, and market mechanism. So she's been part of the TEEB and IPES Global Biodiversity Assessment Reports, NTCA, CAMPA Monitoring Committee member, chairing the Delhi Scientific Committee on Wetlands, and member of Capitals Coalition, UK. May I request ma'am to please present the findings of the study outcome. Thank you.
So thank you very much. Madhav had to leave. He was to travel to Goa. So thanks for all the support, WRI, for making this working paper launch today. I had a chance to work with this organization for 3 years and had a wonderful experience of executing this very, very challenging study. When I joined, I was given this task of, creating something which can cover my domain of expertise, which was environmental economics and doing valuation of various kinds of ecosystem services. And a huge report which came out that time in 2018, where Dr. Dalwai was heading this report, and 18-volume report came out, talked about how agriculture can be, I would say, recreated in a way that you are able to double farmers' income. And of course, the suggestions were plenty because it was a huge work done by under his charismatic leadership. And we also have another very charismatic, agricultural, I would say, administrator who actually led huge amount of interventions in this domain. Dr. Siraj is in front of us. Happy that he's chairing today's session of panel discussion. So, hearty welcome all the panelists, all the esteemed members, and my colleagues, friends to this session. Well, I kept thinking about how should I provide some different dimension to the huge amount of work being done by Dr. Dalwai, and we can create something which also augments his reports, complements to the work which is being done by this committee. And I happen to be part of a couple of initiatives. Welcome, Ruben, one of the panelists who was busy in the meeting in Europe has just joined us. So, part of this initiative, the Economics of Ecosystems and Biodiversity, supported by UNEP, for a very, very long time. And me and Dr. Pavan Sukhdev, who led this particular study, and a couple of other, us, did work in deep study, and happened to be part of the chapters on which we wrote about the methodology to capture the value of ecosystem services. And in 2018, incidentally, on the World Environment Day, India being the country, heavily populous country, and we also lead in terms of food production. Variety of the biodiversity also exists in terms of food production in the country. UNEP decided to have a launch of Deep Agri Food Report, which was specialized on agriculture and food production from India. So we had a launch in 2018, and that's what I went back. I said, why not use this particular report and the whole framework and calculus which is being developed in the Deep Agri Food, and try to evolve these values, this mechanism in the country by executing to certain sites and try to see how we can apply this particular framework at different sites. So that was the intent, that was the initiative that we took further and tried to do this work. Of course, the huge work was done in 2.5 years' time of execution of the report. But definitely, many outcomes are there. But right now, we were able to produce the working paper one, which was on transforming the yardstick used to measure benefits from the farm sector, moving beyond per hectare yield. Because the moment we talk about agriculture, in the last session, intensively talked about food system agriculture and how we can just not just provide sort of food security, but also nutritional security. We talked about millets. This is the year of International Year of Millets, decade of ecosystem restoration. How agriculture can be restored, can get back to system. We had in the country nobody heard about using modern techniques of production. We were all doing natural farming, organic farming traditionally, but it changed to through green revolution by using these modern inputs. But we also bear the wrath of these inputs, and we realized that we need to come back to this system the way it should be, a very multiple dimensional system which is very balanced, very holistic. That's the idea of doing this work here. So we did this study, doubling farmers' income in India, agroecological based considerations as the flagship study, and we did a couple of other things which I'll just briefly mention in the end. But the major focus was to apply so-called TEEP calculus, the economics of ecosystem and biodiversity calculus, in a geography. It is a huge amount of work. We picked up a geography. Somebody close that door because sort of noise is coming inside. Thank you. So I'll just quickly present what we did by applying this calculus, and of course, complementing this calculus with some other, initiatives, some other yardsticks, some other kind of, frameworks which are being prevalent in the system. Because we also had to connect the outcomes with the livelihoods of farmers, with their own, incomes, increasing their well-being at the end of it, not just income, but with the well-being, which also includes health, socioeconomic factors, cultural factors together. That's what deep calculus is all about. I'll talk about it later. So then highlights that in summary, what we did, we looked at the mechanisms of improving farmers' income, moving from traditional systems of yield-based and productivity to much larger landscape-based, kind of factors. By this is the context and challenge in which we worked. So we proposed a system in which we are able to measure natural capital as well. We talked about all kinds of capitals, which is something minimum you invest to get its multiplier effect. It multiplies many a times of its original investment. We talk about social capital, intellectual capital, financial capital. We talked about human capital. So, but we never think about also natural capital in the way that investing a rupee in natural capital leads to how many times the return on that particular kind of investment. When investment is made not just in agriculture, we only look at the visible part of it, which is the crop production of various kinds, but never look at from the angle that it also produces. Like it was talked about in the previous session, we talked about the water conservation, water production happens, soil conservation happens, nutrient cycling happens, carbon sequestration happens, biodiversity conservation happens, and number of services also come into being, which are out of our own, view, our own lens doesn't look at these, kind of services, these contributions. Having worked a lot in forestry sector, that's what clicked to my mind to apply this calculus in agriculture, in the agriculture sector as well. It's not agriculture, we call it agroecological sector because we combine agriculture with ecology and with human well-being. So all three things are put together. That's what TEEP's, philosophy and theory was all about. So measuring the natural capital of agriculture, like agriculture, first of all, has got land. Land is such a productive, factor of production. We start with, the Guardian theory of rent, how factors of production, help in augmenting our livelihood, our own, well-being. So there are many invisibles. So in fact, in the adjoining room, we had a showcasing event because some of the audience here was also present in that, where we're trying to make the invisibles of agroecological sector visible by using this yardstick, using this particular calculus, capturing these values, giving them kind of recognition, I would say respect. We are using so many, benefits which are called as ecosystem services from agriculture. We are using, but we are many at times misusing, overusing, or abusing these services because we're not paying to anybody about, agriculture gives you conservation of water, it gives you landscape value. So many films are being shot in, mustard fields and, floral fields. We enjoy the beauty of agriculture, but never have to pay back to it. It does carbon sequestration, it does so many other functions. So the idea is to using this particular lens, trying to make invisibles from agriculture sector visible to the radar of all set of stakeholders, not just policymakers, all set of stakeholders, the corporate sector, the people, the consumers, the industrialists, the whole area of people involved in the entire value chain of agriculture. So it was of course we also face the challenges of COVID. Agriculture sector did not. It is the sector I would say which was a bright spot during COVID-19. And Dr. Siraj Hussain, in fact, has been a lot of inspiration to us because he started a very interesting series of discussion on IIC's platform, in the International Platform on Sustainable Agriculture. How in challenging times it survived, rather it was even lit up so much as compared to many other sectors. So this is what the trigger and the encouragement even during COVID times for us to do this very challenging work in India. So we did a micro study analysis of ecosystem services, making the invisibles to visible, combining it with visibles. It is the approach. And of course, lots of things have come out. But just to give you one example, if we look at the farmer's field, a per hectare yield of a farmer's field, or maybe a household, we take a household as a unit. And when you add invisibles in our site of Barkhedi Abdullah Panchayat in Madhya Pradesh, which is a very charismatic place to base our study, led by a women sarpanch, a Columbia University educated sarpanch, which came back to her own village to apply a mechanism to converge agricultural schemes to provide knowledge to farmers such that they can practice sustainable agriculture. It was triggered to select this site. And Madhya Pradesh itself leading state in terms of agriculture production, and many interventions were very successfully made over there. So when we added these few selected indicators, few selected other values, we had a whole list of indicators or values, but very challenging task to collect data for that because we haven't done something, there was no baseline, so you have to establish a baseline. So we used some of the primary information, but had to base it on the secondary data to calculate these values. Did that we found they generate additional income worth of 0.12 million rupees to 0.75 million rupees if we generate these amount of benefits. This is the value of benefits they generate while practicing their, agriculture production systems are being put into process. So why not when they provide so much? I've done a lot of work of forestry sector, and many of you were involved, engaged in that mechanism as well. And we worked a lot for the Finance Commission. I myself initiated work with the Finance Commission to also provide this knowledge about contribution of forest beyond timber, beyond NTFP, to talk about invisibles from forestry sector. And we were able to convince Finance Commission to add this value in their formula. It changed into additional grant in 13 Finance Commission. We worked further on it. Sopan was engaged with us, deeply to do this work, and we were able to convince Finance Commission to establish a formula. And what was grant changed into a kind of allocation of resources from the individual pool of taxes. And further worked on behalf of Ministry in the last Finance Commission. We did a whole study not on forestry but also on climate change and environment. That was in my mind. Why not also set up? I made a case of green bonus of many Himalayan states of the country, and I worked with Himalayan Initiative, and Ruben was part of that, Himalayan Initiative, and made a case for all the Himalayan states for additional funding on account of their forest cover. Similar case we want to build for agriculture. Why not a green bonus for agriculture as well? So we are recommending tax rebates. We have subsidies on inorganic, cultivation practices, but we don't have subsidies support so much on agroforestry. There are things coming up on organic farming, many other interventions. Dr. Savarna is here, who was also one of the committee members, guiding us in the study, a technical committee member. And we did a study of allied services from agriculture, which is fisheries, and documented three very interesting cases of coal fisheries in Jammu and Kashmir, fisheries in Odisha and Assam. How farmers also augment their incomes through rice fish cultivation. A complementarity model was developed for that particular sake. So this is kind of policy recommendations being given. Do a payment for ecosystem services. We talked a lot about realigning subsidies that's required in agriculture sector, and also providing a kind of kind of a recommendation for also giving for positive externalities. Give a kind of a payment and return for that as well, or reward for that. So just quickly running through, not going to details because of course it was a huge amount of work, but focusing mainly on the kind of a calculus we use for the purpose. We are aware of the status of agriculture in India. That's what you can find on the extreme left side. It is the sector which supports huge amount of people, population, their money, income, they survive. But of course, because of lack of incentives, we found in many states where we visited for other documentation of case studies that people are leaving agriculture, shifting to some other kind of occupations because governments are providing jobs to them in other sectors. And this is one of the recommendation came in terms of also adding complementarity to the agriculture sector through non-farm kind of income activities, but not by leaving agriculture, but complementing agriculture. So our entire base was actually Dalwai committee's recommendations. We met Dr. Dalwai, had a detailed meeting discussion with him, and trying to understand his recommendations and trying to also convey, having had such a huge body of knowledge being generated, how we can complement his work to also add additional dimension of invisibles. So much of interventions being suggested by improving crops and livestock productivity, utilization of resource efficiency, increased production systems should be also aligned as per agroecological principles, talk about value chain. Every aspect was covered definitely, but visible ones. Of course, when you use increased efficiency, invisibles come into being some way or the other, but they need to be captured very, very truly in the system. This was a challenge in front of us to also internalize so-called environmental costs and benefits when you practice agriculture of various kinds, inorganic, organic, and combined with agroforestry. Many initiatives are there, natural farming, we do that, and then try to provide incentives through the system. So we concentrated more on the natural capital part of agriculture. Land is one of the capitals which gives you multiple times of return, plus what kind of practices you follow, that makes a difference. What kind of policies you have will make a difference. There's every aspect we look at the multiple lenses to provide that support. So we try to highlight hidden elements in agriculture, agroecological systems. If you look at this is a systems approach we follow, shifting from per hectare yield approach to systems approach, which systems comprise of three P's: the people, the process, and the products. So we look at all three things together. And what is there currently existing, what is also required can be transformed, which is the potential of transformation. So you have farmers, producers, market players like that, and people, farming, allied activities, backward and forward linkages as processes, products and outputs, crops, livestock, feed, farm inputs, agri-waste. A lot of discussion on food waste was done in the previous session. But we also found that there's a lot of potential existed which can be added to the existing so-called model of agriculture. Look at the physical and mental health of farmers when they are practicing knowledge, awareness, well-being, the skillfulness in terms of processes, sustainable, resource efficient, tailored to local context, not just following a blanket approach. Community participation in terms of outputs, not just food security, but in nutritional security. We talk so much about millets or superfoods and so many things. We wrote a lot, in fact, during the currency of projects. Almost 15 op-eds are published. I must have participated, spoke on 35 plus, platform, which was kind of a, live literature review for us to gather knowledge and share our own experience. Eco-friendly, once climate resilient. That's what, we talk about biodiversity, which is actually climate change, which is actually resilience, which is actually a safety net in the system. So we are forgetting diversity of agricultural crops. Also, this team itself talks about biodiversity first and then ecosystem services. This is what we were trying to bring in together. The idea was to actually look at invisible environmental, social, cultural costs. Similarly, environmental, social, cultural benefits. When you practice something, it destroys the system. If practices are wrong, when you practice, more benign kind of practices are there, then definitely it adds to the value. So intangible, negative, positive externalities all have to be accounted for. Then only you will get the true value of agriculture. And Ruben also leads India's true cost accounting project, where we are trying to capture. We have done this more on forest now on wetland and non-agriculture, true cost accounting. What is the true value of provisioning of agricultural services? Whether it is agriculture development leads to huge amount of environmental burden in the system, or it is also saving environment. It is kind of a complementing the environmental conservation. So the conservation versus development, instead of that, conservation and development mutually reinforcing kind of process should be there in the system. So we talked about more of intangible systems, definitely. This is again how we try to mainstream visibles. We trying to account for example, why productivity has reduced in India so much. Dr. Rajasan will give you more about in his talk in terms of because of climate change impact, soil erosion, water scarcity. So why not we talk about agriculture as a source of water, as a source of retention of soil or richness of soil, as a source of response to climate change by doing sequestration of carbon and as a climate regulation source. So what natural capital accounting does is it tries to seek a balance between economic productivity and environmental sustainability. Right now, there's a burden environment because you can see the bar tilting towards left. It is pushing environmental sustainability downwards and picking up the economic productivity. So we apply to this agricultural T framework to understand what is the environmental cost of agricultural production and accordingly give suggestions, give compliments to that intervention such that you can have a balance between the two. We talk about not just food system, we talk about ecological health, we also talk about human well-being. These are three building blocks of T. This is a little complicated, but this is the diagram of T study or T process where we bring whatever under the sun on the field on its its backward linkages and its forward linkages in terms of the value chain. We bring under one sort of a umbrella, and that's how we must understand agriculture as agroecological system. So this is what's the idea. So we looked at, we don't have a pointer anyway, so we just I'll quickly run through because it will take much time. So we talk about typical accounting means stocks and flows. So that's what we try to do here. We take the stock of all kinds of capital, not just produced capital, which is buildings and machinery and infrastructure, development, finance, etc. But also talk about human capital, your skilled labor, your skilled farmers, knowledgeable farmers, or they are into good working conditions. Like we do have lots of stories and information about news about farmers working in rice fields, how they also face a lot of health hazards as such. Social capital in terms of land access, tenure, whether you own the land, is a community land, it is owned by individuals, in what condition it is, opportunities, food security, empowerment, a lot of knowledge, cooperation. We talked about FPOs and all these things come in social capital, but we must not forget the natural capital, on which for which all other capitals are based. If natural capital is gone, and everything is gone. So we talk about water in the field, soil, vegetation, vegetation cover, habitat quality, biodiversity, etc. Then we look at the flows. What is going out of the agriculture system? Agriculture and food outputs. There are purchase inputs also to produce this. There are ecosystem services coming out, and there are residuals. We talked a lot about residuals in the last session. So this is to be combined together. So much of residuals also in terms of food waste, in terms of crop waste, and we have burning as a big issue coming out of the residuals from agriculture. Then this is across the value chain. You cannot forget the value chain. We just can't only confine to the production system on the field, but how it goes forward and what it draws from the other sectors as well is the value chain. So outcomes, changes in the capital are being seen because of your interventions here, your practices here. You might add to natural capital, you might add to produced capital, or vice versa would happen. And impacts can be environmental impacts, they can be economic impacts, health impacts, and social impacts. This is the whole gamut of things in which T framework works. Very, very challenging. If you list these elements, there will be more than 95 elements. You have to capture this information, which is a very, very arduous task. So we can attempt whatever we could do in a given time, facing the challenges of COVID, and then can go ahead. Get some water, please. So this was the flagship study. Thank you. Let me just quickly mention to you about it because this is part of the flagship work which was done by the team. The study aimed at how to increase or improve farmers' income and support their livelihoods by accounting for visible and invisible flows of ecological, social, cultural value in a sustainable manner. TEEP's, theory, philosophy, or tagline, which talks about making the invisibles visible. That's what is the tagline of TB always talk about. Then secondly, so we want to apply this particular calculus at a particular site just to experiment at a pilot site how this calculus works, what is available, what is not, what are the challenges, what are the gaps, what we could achieve, what we could not, but at least sensitize stakeholders, sensitize, people to know about what this is all about. And it is, you might be thinking why production is going down and you don't bother about the rest of the, it's like you're looking at the yolk of the egg but not the white of the egg, because white of the egg holds your egg yolk. If you don't think about that system part, those elements, and your, this would not work. So that's what is the idea. We also thought it is again the deep format in which I worked, and also the IP based format in which I work right now. Besides doing calculus, applying a calculus, or besides doing valuation of at a particular geography, we also document lots of other case studies, because something may be prevalent in this geography, but something else will be prevalent somewhere else. We talked about organic farming, we talked about agroforestry, fisheries, collectives, women empowerment, use of IC tools, and the whole value chain enrichment. We'll talk about, well, briefly I'll show you that slide. This is the second major objective. We documented more than 80 cases, then deep dived about 16 to 20 to understand about what went inside these cases, what made them successful. So we also had a very interesting scoring pattern, how to select these cases based upon lots of indicators. We had a huge list of improvement in crop productivity, improvement in livestock resource efficiency, savings in cost of production, increase in crop intensity, diversification, and so on. We picked up these studies and deep dive 20 of them, but that will be in the second paper we'll be publishing later on. And then based upon what we have experienced, recommend changes, enrichment of maybe policy interventions, institutional interventions, market mechanism, incentive-based mechanisms, because we talked a lot about pollution-based principle, polluter-based principle. We talk about negative externalities more than the positive ones. So how to also encourage farmers, encourage owners to generate these positive externalities in the system such that we have a mechanism, and we should have a mechanism to also incentivize them. There's no market for them. Of course, carbon market is coming, but still not such high value. So this is all. I will just skip this slide. So the system was more integrated in nature. These are the building blocks we can think about. Of course, because you must have multiple lenses to look at that. It should not be heavy towards or concentrated towards only one particular centric towards only, for example, sustainable agriculture. We should also look at poverty and reduction, food social security, equity, climate change, human well-being, green growth, SDGs and NDCs. We have to look at all those aspects together. So very quickly, not going into much details, but we had comprehensive. We selected a work site, a geography. We realized Panchayat would be a good unit to actually select for, because individual village will be a smaller unit and Panchayat will be a gamut of villages put together. Will be a better visible unit to actually look into. And we looked at various states' performances and found Madhya Pradesh. Not just I come from Madhya Pradesh. I picked up Madhya Pradesh, but it happened naturally that you found state has been winning Karmik Krishak Award. I was in Bhopal for all my life and reading about the state, and also reviewed many other states and the performances. And they have a very high rate of agricultural growth and high percentage of population engaged in agriculture. And then they have more than doubled farmers' income at many places, couple of places. They didn't wait for any model to be given to them, but they had done this remarkable work. So why not pick up then this gender empowerment, women leadership. So we picked up this village finally with filtration of this young girl who was Sarpanch of this village, Bhakti Sharma, and doing this work. So this is how, and she converged all the schemes together in the state. We picked up the state. So this is what we try to look at. I think this is broadly explained, but the visible direct values and the indirect values, the invisibles, put them together. Besides agriculture production system, we added how systemic changes due to agri processes would lead to increase in output, reduction in waste, residuals reduction, and generate co-benefits from agriculture system. This is the broad idea of the study. That's why I wanted to put it on a big screen, because a couple of things are there. And so typical classification of ecosystem services, we use provisioning, regulating, supporting, agricultural. We listed these down, but when we started doing work, of course, each service estimation itself becomes a project in itself, unless you have interesting, good data. And we wanted to use a sophisticated suite of software we use for tiger reserves for my past work, called as Invest, which is integrated valuation of ecosystem services and trade-offs, which maps ecosystem services pixel-wise on the site. is the best way to capture what exists where. It's not that every entire farm will be having same water retention potential. It might vary. It may not be having same carbon sequestration potential. It might vary. So this gives you very interesting information pixel wise, and that can be more. It's like a precision tolling, and then accordingly you will suggest your interventions. It wasn't possible because we did try, but it requires huge data. And something which is starting now, you can't expect you to get entire information that you ask for. You go with your wish list, you just get few. So we use secondary information data and benefits transfer method to do this. So we also classified them into flow and stock values. You can see there are two stock values. The soil fertility maintenance, which is something which gives you production. It is a reservoir flow and agricultural agroforestry mixed cultivation. It remains for a while. It is like a stock. So this is again a stock value. So we use a couple of methodologies to capture this. There's no time to actually give you, but paper does talk about how we captured these, values. We captured carbon sequestration, pest biocontrol, crops, agricultural land, livestock, like that. We went on doing that, and we found that there's a huge, not very huge, but there's a considerable increase in income. Even some part of it is compensated to the farmers for creation of these values. So this is what is the idea of doing valuation over here. It will be a session in itself to give great details about each and every calculation, but that's what is being done. We did benefits transfer. It means similar studies done elsewhere at similar kind of geography, similar kind of population profile. You can borrow estimates. You can adjust to the population and the prices and get the value through benefits transfer. And of course, market pricing is something which is everybody knows about. We have a market for carbon, we agricultural land, livestock, and crops. So we definitely did use that. So the moral of the story is that when we looked at agroecological best practices across this particular geography, the estimated annual per hectare economic benefit in Barkhedi Abdullah Panchayat, where we actually did this micro study, could be 0.68 million rupees, raising the potential annual value benefits per household from 0.12 million to 0.75 million. This is quite a considerable increase if you. This is the worth of ecosystem services benefits they provide to the system. So if I'm a provider, I must get something in exchange. So why not we can create a market? If not market has huge transaction cost. But we can always create incentives, we can create compensation, we can create rewards, we can create some kind of mechanisms where farmers are incentivized, they're encouraged to continue these practices. It's like giving them even for starting with normal profits and increasing it to super profits, like that kind of situation. Of course, after deducting the cultivation cost. But there are of course limitations to the study. Paper demonstrates usefulness of TB agri-food framework for capturing hidden values from agroecological systems, definitely. But we did not measure the disservices, because the practices are inorganic in nature. The soil is degraded. There are spillovers. There are crop burning happening. Then that should be again accounted for, and it reduces the value of your positive contributions. Like we have studies done in India and abroad as well by World Bank and many other organizations. Terry, in fact, has also done study long back to know about what is the real value of your contribution. Because if you account for environmental cost, your actual contributions reduce. It rather they become negative. You are in fact guzzler of ecosystem values because you are impacting it so much. The environmental cost is so high, and you say it is positive development, it is not. It is much more negative in nature. Then further application of study framework should take into account specific local conditions. And this was just one geography to demonstrate, to apply this calculus, which we applied. And we also realized what more is required to be done to make the calculus complete. Each and every element, what I showed you as a dream list or dream map should get, I wanted to populate each and every element, but we could not because it did not get information. So you have to generate that information, then you can definitely populate the entire table. I was very keen that every element which should have a value attached to it, but it wasn't possible given the current level of information and data sets. In fact, when we went to a department to ask about a couple of things, but it was a news for them. Oh, this also exists in agriculture. So this is what, you have to start from that particular base to generate the system effectively. And Ruben will share with you his experience of work. They are applying TEEP calculus in 3 states and in agroforestry and organic farming, what kind of, challenges, what kind of, systems already set in, systems are already set. So we will talk more about it. The suggestions on policy pathways is provided, but requires further refinement based on existing institutional policy mechanism. How not just policy intervention, but whole institutional mechanism should change. What we realized that there's so many. I mean, Dr. Hussain will talk about huge number of schemes. He was secretary of Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare, and I think this is the ministry, the department, which has maximum number of policies and programs, I think, running in the country, but not many people are aware of that. So lack of knowledge, lack of information. That's what we found, that she converged all that, all those programs to make it happen in her village. So that's how it happens. And impact of selected elements are not covered. We just look at the point of time information, not the period of periodic information. But this is just a starting point. There's a huge scope of work, definitely, which one can do and do that. Of course, economic tools can be applied in terms of payment for ecosystem services and rewarding for positive externalities and subsidies. We talked about last session reappropriating subsidies, recalibrating them. Lots of examples exist in agriculture sector in Tanzania, in China, Costa Rica, Mexico, are implementing. I happen to be part of this NatCap project of Stanford, and in fact, recently they talk about gross ecosystem product now. It is the value of your nature in the country. What is the wealth of nature in terms of gross ecosystem product? We talk about gross domestic product, but what is the value of your own ecosystem? It is much more than production produced system or the production system which is existent. Then all these policy instruments. This is very quickly, we documented number of practices in the country across the value chain, filtering out with Dr. Dalwai's recommendations. We look at thematic areas and zeroed it down to 20 cases and deep dive, in fact, 16 to talk about interventions across agriculture production, manufacturing and processing, distribution, marketing, retail, household consumption. Very interesting information we got, and Dr. Savarna is here, who helped us in documenting very interesting cases of fisheries sector in the country. So this is what lots of things are happening. Not many people would know about it. So whether we can replicate these models, we can scale them up, we can have lessons learned. Timbuktu Collective, amazing example of how women are being empowered. We talked about Ekgaon MP, which talked about bringing knowledge to the farmers, where they were using 60 kg per hectare of fertilizer, they're using just 20 kgs, like that. So this is what we had done. Lots of suggestions, definitely, we could be done across more agroecological zones to do granular research, database creation, green bonus and economic subsidies, building capacities and awareness, strategic and sustainable growth, definitely. Of course, we can always give lots of suggestions to everybody, but this came out of a lot of consultations we had conducted and what we experienced through conducting these large number of. We have a huge team to actually execute this project across. People also kept coming and going because tenure was fixed. Some people were throughout, like Parul and Charu and a couple of others. Like Karo worked as an intern with us, she still was studying. Like many people, joined and did amazing work for us. And we had suggestions for policymakers, for corporate people, donor agencies, partners, and collaborations. And across the currency of the study, we did lots of publication. And WRI communication team, we're thankful to them, helping us so much in reaching out to right kind of platforms to publish. In fact, I published 3 international papers, 2 on, of course, my previous work, but during this time, it connects very well to what we were doing. And one, me, Parul, and a colleague had published on, certification process in agriculture, and had a chance to speak on so many platforms to learn from everybody, and got huge amount of support from a very brilliant, very, very charismatic, very forthcoming, very, very supportive. It was a very great challenge for us to execute this work. Dr. Khosla, in fact, he coordinated, he chaired our session of showcasing study when we had it in the next adjoining room. Dr. Siraj Hussain was there, Dr. Suvarna sitting here, and Dr. Jigmet Tapka from Ministry, Raghav Chandra Saab was also additional secretary, former secretary, Dr. Atul Bagai from UNEP, because it was a deep study and he gave a lot of support from Pushpam Mulle, he leads the UNEP. He's a chief economist and senior advisor in Washington, D.C. Suman Sahib leads Green Campaign, Shloka Nath, ICC, Vikram Gajja, SRI Switzerland, Mala Reddy. They all gave us so much support in terms of also collating information, gathering case studies. Bablu Ganguly of Timbuktu Collective, K.S. Gopal, like that we continued and had a very supportive team with me, Parul, Charu, Gopal, Dr. Kadekuri, Dr. Nain, and Asiguha, and a couple of others who worked with us to support us. So thank you so much, and I hand it over to Dr. Nambi. Take this forward. Sorry, thank you for your patience and sorry for, I think, little extended presentation, but it was a huge amount of work. Very quickly showcase to all of you. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. In the interest of time, just straight away go to the questions because it's lots of technical stuff has been discussed. What I intend to do is look at the macro issues, some of the basics, rather than dwelling deep into the technicalities of this. I'm sure within the time frame we can't understand this unless we assimilate that knowledge what has been produced there. It's going to be difficult for us to kind of but at least the papers are available. The paper is available, so you could make sense out of it when you read that. So in simple terms, what it talks about is the kind of the relationship between agriculture and agroecology, and then the evaluation approach. Now, how do you kind of evaluate uh, ecosystem services within the agriculture context? What are the kind of pointers we have for the policy? These are the three important things which comes out of this whole study. So, TB as an approach, how valuable it is, to kind of test the validity of it within a certain context. One of the interesting thing is it's applied at the local level. Normally, we have seen examples from the regional level and national level, but this is the first time it has been applied in a local context. That's quite interesting. So, without much ado, let me turn on to Mr. Dr. Hussain, who has a wide experience as a. We have an illustrious and very interesting mix of people here in the panel, in the sense that it has been represented by public sector, private sector, NGOs, academics, and only the farmer is missing here, I guess. So, uh, Dr. Hussain has a really rich experience serving as a secretary at the agriculture department, and particularly focused on agriculture for a long time. He's been writing a lot about it as well. So, sir, maybe I'll just slightly deviate from this. And there are lots of jargons today, which carbon neutrality, net zero. Wherever you go, we talk about all this stuff. And landscape approach is one of those things, as you know. So, how do you see? Maybe you could quickly unpack what it means in agriculture context, particularly in the ecosystem services context. That would be my.
Thank you. And my compliments to Dr. Verma for producing a wonderful report. It is always very difficult to work for 2 years and then spend half an hour in presenting the report. So, thank you very much for all your effort and also to your team. Very well done. Now, basically, what we are discussing is sustainability of agriculture. So, if one has to reduce it to one sentence, what is being discussed is sustainability. In the Indian context, it is even more difficult because of a very large population. India's food surpluses are very small, very marginal. So, and I've been writing about this, that many of the laws which we thought will liberate agriculture were actually for a surplus economy, which we are not. A very important point to note here is that a law on sustainability, making agriculture more sustainable, has recently been adopted by the European Union, the landmark nature legislation, and it is being opposed by the farmers. So, very nice tweets are coming from the farmers' organizations saying that at least the communists were more honest when they took away our land. So, read about that if you think it is of interest to you. A similar law is also under discussion in New Zealand, where the government wants, because of various COP commitments, to reduce the number of livestock. So, even developed countries are struggling with how to formulate a policy which will make agriculture not only productive and self-sufficient and export-oriented for those countries, but also sustainable in the long run. This is a particularly bad year. And right now, as we have watched floods in several states, also deficient rainfall in several other states, and record high temperatures in US and Europe. So I think everybody now recognizes that agriculture also has to do its bit. Of course, it is not only agriculture, but there are other sectors of economy also which have to take a lot of steps to make that particular sector more sustainable. Now, this study, which is focused on a village, has shown how it may be profitable even in economic terms if these things were to be taken into account. When I was in Hectare, a water atlas was produced by Dr. Sharma. I do not know how many of you have seen that, but please do have a look, where the water productivity of crops was calculated. So it is not only the per hectare productivity which is important, but also how much water you need in each state or in each geography to produce 1 quintal of a given commodity. So since water is better understood than many other parameters which Dr. Verma has highlighted, I thought it would be easier for you if you if you saw that study and understood how Punjab is not the most water efficient state for agriculture. So I think I'll stop there. Your panel is quite large, and I think you have to wrap up by 6 o'clock. So maybe we will.
Yeah, maybe we'll just reflect on my question a bit, on the landscape part of it quickly.
You see, because of the complexity of the governance structure in India, the agricultural policy, including the policy on sustainable agriculture, has to be a joint effort between the center and the states. Now, what has been happening is that the burden for sustainability is being shifted to the states as far as the agriculture is concerned. Now, that is one of the crux, of the problems, because unless both the union government and the states work together, uh, as we did during the Green Revolution, which was a great success, uh, a sustainable form of agriculture it will be very difficult to achieve. I think I'll stop there because there is so much more to say.
So, in order to achieve inclusive and sustainable growth, we need to have several partners, right? The partnership matters so much. And how can you drive such partnerships, make policy, and which can help to meet the challenges what has been outlined in the TEEP process with the application TEEP process as well?
Thank you. First of all, congratulations, Dr. Verma. In full disclosure, I've been a student of her and I've learned immensely from her classes. So we owe a great deal of our knowledge to your lectures, Dr. Verma, and thanks for the seminal study. I work in a private sector consulting firm. It is a strategic advisory. More and more clients of ours from India and abroad are looking at regenerative ag as an issue. And one of the conversations we are having with them is to change the way we look at farmer, and take a look at how a future farmer in 2030 looks like. We all want that farmer to produce high quality produce for us, something organic, no GM, no urea, no pesticide, the best of it. We want it to be cheap. And we want it to be available when we need it. These days, we want everything to be available throughout the year. And if you look at from a farmer's perspective, by 2030, their dwindling income will go further down, cost of inputs will further up, climate stresses will be in a hockey curve. All these stresses would make farmers to maybe give away farming and run away, and we have high expectation of the farmer. Plus, they have to pay for their children's school fee, the medical, they don't have a social safety net. So if you place a future farmer, largely the smallholder farmer, and there if you want to further get a real sense, think of a female farmer, which is a smallholder farmer in India. Then you can understand the list of stresses and expectations from you and I, the urban eaters, we put on that farmer. And if you take just a climate lens, I hope you all are learning swimming these days. I live in Gurgaon, and I see people carrying raft boats. It's now becoming so real that climate is here. It's impacting us now. Forget about future generations. So if you take the context of future farmer, then few things have to come together. And thanks, Chair, for highlighting or reminding us of the Green Revolution. We and Dalberg and IORA are forming a consortium or initiative to begin to look at future farmer at the beginning of our partnership. And the way we were looking at it, that, these initiatives of NICRA, DICRA, various other initiatives which are talking about climate smart agriculture and state, village level, agri-smart villages, this, that, these are not going to do the trick. I think we need to have a blunt instrument like we did in 70s, like the Green Revolution, state and center working together, external donors working together, and putting a premium on practices rather than growth-based incentives. So if you look at it in that context, that then you're thinking like, okay, should we put a cess on petrol and diesel, some amount, which then wholesale collected and provided wholesale through repurposed subsidies to farmers of India to change their practices with support of different inputs, which then lead to a produce which you and I like, which is climate informed, sensitive, durable, enriched and fortified, and all the things you want from the farmer. But that farmer will not deliver you that. I can give you in writing. I come from a farming family. I'm an agricultural economist. The incomes are so small that you can't sustain your daily expenses, let alone anything else. So the point here is that we need to look at large scale interventions. They could only happen through partnerships between state and center, external donors, people in the north, which are looking not of India, but in global north, which are looking at climate credits. I think we need to create wholesale mechanisms where green bonus maybe could be turned into climate bonus, which is not measured by hectare and hectare, it's practice wide. So if North India goes from this practice to that, wholesale the subsidies would be repurposed. And as far as partnerships are concerned, in a modest way, we are starting a partnership. It's an open call for people to join. Our focus is future farmer, forecasting what that farmer would look like in terms of their stresses and what opportunities they are left with to provide us the kind of food we expect of them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now let's turn on to Dr. Swarna, another important bureaucrat, who as a veteran bureaucrat, who has rich experience in fisheries. He served as the board of as a CEO of the National Fisheries Development Board. And this particular study has lots of case studies from the fisheries sector. So I just want to kind of, this country has witnessed the green revolution, the white revolution, and we are in the doorstep of the blue revolution now. Lots of talk has been there about the blue revolution, and particularly looking at the fisheries and aquaculture sector. What is your take on it, Madam? How do you find the future of it, given this? Because one of the things you talk about partnerships, I had the privilege of working with Professor Swaminathan. He says the green revolution was an orchestra. It is not it's a symphony, not an orchestra, symphony. Without farmers' enthusiasm, it couldn't have achieved. That's a major factor in achieving those things. So it's important that do we have that kind of enthusiasm today with the farmers or the fishing communities? And that's a question.
Thank you, Mr. Appadurai. And I would also like to congratulate Dr. Verma and her team for making it such a beautiful, study, because I was closely associated with her because she came to NFDB to discuss with me, like, we want to look at the fishery sector as well, because usually agriculture and allied sciences, this is what we keep saying, and fisheries is supposed to be one of the allied sectors. And even sir was he's former secretary agriculture, so the fisheries also was part of it, a small wing as part of the Ministry of Agriculture. Later, a separate ministry has been established now, and a separate secretary is there. And lots of funds are flowing into fisheries sector. So the blue revolution, because I am from agriculture, my academic background is agronomy, but I would be talking about blue revolution now because everybody else is talking about green revolution. I worked as commissioner fisheries at state level also, Telangana. Inland, it's an inland state, it doesn't have a coast. But then even then I had lots of observations and experiences about why it's going to be a bright, kind of thing for fishery sector. But after coming to NFDB with the whole, country under its jurisdiction, lots of insights. Marine sector is one of the most important sectors. Though production and productivity point of view, it's inland sector now which takes the cake. And again, fisheries is slightly different from agriculture because agriculture is the culture. It's culture. But fisheries has capture fisheries as well as culture fisheries. It is something related to the water. Of course, water needs some land to be, staying there. So land also is related. It could be a reservoir, it could be a pond, it could be the ocean. So it's totally dependent on these natural resources, land and water. Earlier, it used to be the God given wealth because nobody stocked the fishes artificially. The fish seed stocking was not done earlier, even in inland water bodies. Now, with Blue Revolution scheme coming into picture, it was I mean, it was supposed to be a big scheme initially, but it was closed in 2 years, and a bigger scheme was brought into force. Prime Minister Matsya Sampada Yojana, with more investment and more participation of the fishers as well as the fish farmers. That means aqua farmers. And one more scheme has come up, FIDF, Fisheries and Aquaculture Infrastructure Development Fund, which mostly focuses on large infrastructure, because investment on infrastructure used to be very, very poor in fisheries sector. Some harbors, some fish landing centers in a very crude kind of shape. But now even Sagarmala also is, the convergence with Sagarmala is happening. Lots of investment and lots of focus, because livelihoods of the millions of the fishermen are depending on this. Plus, the sector is proving to be a very profitable one. Where water is available now, it's not just paddy. People are looking for, what are the other means to, because it's much more profitable than paddy. And paddy, as you know, the methane emission and all those things. So the support price, related burden also on state exchequer, because they have to procure the paddy. If it is surplus paddy, it would be very difficult. So these things, so slowly the visibility of fisheries sector is coming into picture. I know many, earlier it used to be like a poor man's livelihood, but no more. The technocrats, even the retired bureaucrats, many people, have approached me, those who have land and water, they want to get into, because now new technologies have come into existence. Recirculatory aquaculture system, biofloc system, and many things, and artificial stocking of the fish seed reservoirs, and even sea ranching is going to happen. River ranching has happened, Ganga, Brahmaputra, because the stocks are naturally there, on decline because of various factors. It's not just anthropogenic or human interventions. And apart from that, indigenous species, the just like agriculture, the biodiversity part, how most of the farm races are disappearing and land races and all. Here also, it's the same thing is happening. In oceans, it's happening. In freshwater bodies, also, it's happening. And the invasive species. All these things are kept in mind while formulating the policies. And you can see Northeast indigenous fish species are being encouraged by going. The mains scheme doesn't have any provision for, but NFDB has made it part of its action plan. Similarly, like Meghalaya, the Manipur Loktak Lake, we know that it's forest department's property. I knew that before getting into fishery sector, but there is one part of the lake where it's owned by the fisheries department. The rights, fishing rights, are given by fisheries department to local fishermen. So how to increase livelihoods there, enhance the livelihoods there? Cage culture is introduced apart from, what's existing, what's already existing there. Sea ranching, I was mentioning to you about, artificial reefs, corals, how everything is interlinked in ecosystem. Like corals, they give shelter, they give, the base for the oceanic organisms to breed, protect them. So in this whole interlinked system, we need to look at the things in a very in integrated manner. And integrated coastal villages, model villages development also is part of the scheme. There are many things to share, but I think time is limited. In fact, the fisheries cooperatives, the social cooperation part, lots of focus is going to be there. FFPOs, fish farmer producer organizations, and differential subsidy patterns for marginalized, communities and women. All these things play a role from the other, some from technology side and some from the other side. So I see a bright future for fisheries sector. As it is, fisheries sector is a maximum foreign exchange earner as on now, as on today. compared to agriculture and all other allied sectors. So it's going to be there. Lots of biosecurity because Vanami fetches maximum foreign exchange. It's an exotic species, and its broodstock comes from Hawaii Islands. So a quarantine center, aquatic quarantine facility is set up at Chennai. If any stock is having any diseases attached to it, associated with it, it gets destroyed. So some measures are taking place apart from developing protocols for our own species, which are commercially important, which can fetch revenues, foreign exchange. So lots of research is also going on. ICR institutions are doing, and others also are doing. Lots to talk, but I think I have to give room for others also to speak.
Thank you,
Thank you.
madam. Each one deserves a lecture, and each thematic area, definitely. And you ended in a very positive note.
This is totally new to all of them. I think.
True. Very true. Uh, Next question is to Naveen, my friend, who works on carbon neutrality a lot, carbon sinks and stuff. This is one of the things which has been talked about a lot, using land as a tool for achieving carbon neutrality. What are the challenges you see? Specifically, one of the things which comes to my mind is the land fragmentation, what you see in the country today. Is it an achievable goal? What is your experience in this front so far?
Thanks a lot for this question. And first of all, congratulations to Madhu ma'am and the entire team for this very interesting study on tea. And let me also quickly share my sentiments with Jagjit. I also happen to be her student way back, I think 20 plus years ago. And I am proud to be part of this panel. And I think you also equally share this pride, man. Before I answer this question, I think we really need to set the context right first. Why are we really talking about sustainable land management as such? And I think we have discussed a lot, like sustainable land management is something that has to be looked from the perspective of where we are, what we want to do in future. Green Revolution did a purpose. It ensured food security. But there was certain sort of limitations to it. Like we have depleted our soils, we have depleted the organic content in the soil. If you look at the macro and micronutrients in the soil, it has depleted. So this depleted soil cannot sustain agriculture anymore. And that's where we really talking about how can we sustain the land, hence sustain the entire agricultural production systems. Now, Jagit did mention very, very clearly, well articulated, that why are we parking these responsibilities of sustainable land management on farmers alone? We are asking farmers to change from conventional agriculture, reduce, stop using inorganic fertilizers, or try to move towards more agroecological way of doing. But we need to really change the food system. As consumers starting, are we looking at buying food which is agroecologically produced? Are we even aware of this? That is there in the market? Then we need to really sort of also look at what's the other incentive for the farmers to make this shift, yeah, towards sustainable land management. Can there be policy incentives? Can there be market incentives? Can there be consumer-based incentives that come in? Now, this question is very interesting. Like and this is not about sustainable land management as a specific. It's also sustainable agriculture. If it's fragmented, where do we really start talking about sustainability of agriculture, right? I think there are a lot of experiences that we have. This long history of farmer producer organizations that's an attempt to really aggregate and sort of make some marketable sense from these small fractured land pieces that we have in agriculture. Can these institutions be used to promote agroecological way of doing? And some of these experiences have been right there. In Andhra Pradesh, if you look at APCNF, has really shown is working with small and marginal farmers, and how do we really promote agroecology, natural farming with them? So there are these bright cases to look at. Can we scale these models and look at how we can sustainably manage our land? That's one. Second is, how do we provide incentives to the farmers to do so? So one incentive, of course, comes through in terms of investments, public investments. Now the right question is to ask, what is the true investment that we need? And the studies like these give you a sense of what the true investment is needed in the sector when we talk about sustainable land management. Maybe we never reach there, but at least there will be some improved investments, public investments there. There are a lot of government programs coming up now. PM Pranam, National Mission on Natural Farming, National Mission on Sustainable Agriculture, and many, many more. Can we leverage these investments that are existing there and then talk about additional and maybe true investments that require? Second sort of incentives or investments should come in from these enterprise-based models that we are talking about. I was fortunate to be part or listening to the last panel which was here, which was talking about circularity systems. Circularity within rural. There is also a potential of circularity of urban rural, wherein you look at this huge organic waste in the urban areas, which needs to be managed well, and there is a huge need for nutrients and carbon in the soil. Can we bring back this to the soil, the urban organic waste? And there is enterprise opportunity there for the FPOs to engage, and that's what we have also piloted and seen in the state of Maharashtra. These are viable models. So can we look at this enterprise-based model? The third sort of incentives or investment need to also come from the market-based systems. For example, if you look at the big sort of international and global agricultural commodity supply chains, they have this mandate to report on ESG as such. They are looking at scope 3 emission reductions. So can we channelize these investments, which the big agricultural commodity supply chains are mandated to work on, and supply some incentives to the farmers under scope 3? There is this entire growing sort of market around voluntary carbon markets, and there have been successful experiments, successful pilots where FPOs have been um, there in the center to provide these incentives from the voluntary carbon markets, right? And this is what we really need to look at, these investment opportunities and how these are really linked to the small and marginal farmers who have small parcels of land. And we and this is something that I have to anyways do, as part of the German Development Corporation, as part of GIZ, we are really committed in India and globally to work on sustainable natural resource management and agroecological promotion. And there is an initiative that we have set up, which is called Agroecology Lighthouse, where these kind of knowledge, expertise, policymakers, we are sort of planning that these flagship agroecology lighthouse will bring on all of these flagship learnings and see how we can generate these collective solutions. No one sector, no one agency can really resolve this. We are talking about a transformation. We are talking about transformative change. We are not talking about small changes here and there. Let's work on this measure in agriculture, that measure in agriculture. It needs a transformative change. And I think I'll stop here with the hope that a lot of these discussions don't just end up in a lot of these intellectual debates, intellectual mind mapping, rather than really looking at how we can collaborate collectively, bring in our expertise and provide some solutions to this transformation. And specifically in the context of small and marginal farmers. That is where much more attention is required.
Thanks, Naveen. Let me move on to Swapan Mehra. I reserved the question of tea a little later so that you could wind up with that. To borrow the phrase from Dr. Madhu, she talked about the yolk and the egg white, right? What is the yolk and the egg white for policy making in the context of sustainable agriculture and resource use efficiency?
Thank you very much for that question. And firstly, I'd like to also mention that I'm also MAM student, and I want to assure all of you that we also have valid work credentials. We are not all here just because we are students, and now also happen to have the privilege of having her as a colleague. So very privileged. I also studied all my lectures on environmental finance with her, which really paved the way for me to do what I do right now. So first, and congratulations to the team, which also includes a lot of our students and my ex-colleagues who've really, I think, come up with a remarkable output in terms of being able to measure, to some extent, the value of benefits that sustainable agriculture can deliver to the economy at large, to society, to governments, to corporations, which is a very incredible output, even though it has certain limitations. It's difficult to put a absolute value to this. If I remember my economic lessons correctly, we all strive towards being able to foretell, forecast, and then realize the total economic benefit from ecosystem conservation. And it's a very hard task because so many of these values are intangible, right? Having said that, I think that we are at a precipice. We are at this inflection point where I think that we all realize that climate change is a major reality. from two sides, right? One is we are all facing the brunt of climate change in our day-to-day lives, and the second is that we are also all causing climate change by the way we are consuming. A large part of that whole mystery is our food and agriculture system, because arguably there are statistics which show that if you are able to value the scope 3 emissions of the food system and agriculture, it is the largest cause of emissions in the world, if you take transport, waste, everything into account. So that's a very important area which we have to work on. And then on the other hand, on absolute basis also, it's not a small measure. In India alone, 14% of our emissions come from agriculture. And if we have to achieve our net zero goals, this 14 will have to become minus 30 or minus 40. Something that we are all working on. We are working with the government here on the roadmap for the net zero, in which the land sector is something we are looking at, and it's incredibly difficult to be able to ascertain how effectively, how much can this sector take on. So we've got this really important sector, land, which is going to be responsible for saving all of us from climate change. And there are only two kinds of managers. One is the government, which controls the forest department, and then there are farmers, right? So these farmers, I think it has been aptly mentioned by everybody, live on the fringes. I would say that the key word here is on the margins. Economically, every decision that they make for changing their systems is informed by the fact that they are on the margins when it comes to ability to invest, right? So there is a lack of credit conventionally, and that lack of credit will be accentuated when we ask them to make a major transition to go from one farming system to the other. And that farming system transition will require investment, technology, know-how at a very large scale. And we want it now, I think, as was mentioned earlier. So that's the yoke of the matter. The white of the matter is how do we support that yoke to get cooked fully so that we can all benefit from its transition, and that's a major challenge. I think we spoke about, I think Naveen, somebody whom we work with closely, very knowledgeable in the sector, very well laid out the three kinds of resources that are available to make this transition. And I think that there are a lot of developments on all three fronts. And there is some very comprehensive thinking going on in India right now, which is market leading. I'll give you a small example of, we all know about carbon credits. We are all involved in the development of India's carbon market. There is also a upcoming market called green credits. We happen to have the privilege of being in the committee which is deciding the outlines of that market, in which we want to value greenness, we want to value water conservation, we want to value tree growing and soil conservation. Very challenging but very path breaking. How do you give a total economic benefit to farmers for managing their land well? There is also the upcoming national carbon market, so on and so forth. The key challenge with all of this is that even though as standalone instruments these have validity, they have some impact, there is also upcoming initiatives in the private sector, organic market connect, this and that and the other. A transition of this scale cannot happen unless, like you mentioned, there is a symphony. And unfortunately or fortunately, that symphony has to be orchestrated by the government, by the public sector. If it has to happen drastically very, very soon. It has happened in the past. It is known to have happened in many sectors. Large scale change in technology and practices have happened in Japan, in Korea, and India. And they've been orchestrated by the government, by the public sector always. So what is it that we need then in order to effect this transition is something that is something that we all need to reflect on. And how do we make that resource accessible to our farmers so that they have the credit and they are off the margins in making a transition is something which is very, very critical. While we give them all the facilities of technology, etc., it's important to make that resource available. So we have tools for that we have accessed and tried in many other sectors. I think we are pioneers in DBT, direct benefit transfer, as a country. We are pioneers in subsidizing measures that lead to various kind of activities, even in agriculture. Fertilizer use is something that we have pioneered and it's not a wrong measure. There was a time when it was the ideal thing to do, and we are the only ones who've done it at such scale. There are leakages, there are failures, but it achieved its desired goal. Today, if India is eating food, we have 240 million tons of grain production. It's because we were effectively able to roll it out. So why can't we replicate that effort now in another direction? Why can't we replicate an effort that every farmer who switches or transitions into a practice which is sustainable is incentivized through a certain measure directly for their effort? At a baseline case, there can be all these other instruments, but that's something that we have to work on. This is the direction in which we are thinking, IORA and Dalberg. This is the initiative that we are launching in terms of being able to come up with the right agri-finance instruments. picking from the best in the world and then using our experience of India, something that we'll work on. And this study gives us a very strong basis to do so, because you finally need to know what is the number that you're chasing in order to give the number. You can't effectively manage what you can't measure. That's the old saying, and I think that this is a very, very positive step in this direction, and we'll continue to engage with everybody in order to take this forward. Thank you so much.
Well said, Swapan. Uh, Let me turn to Ruben, who is a coordinator for True Cost Accounting Initiative and the team, Agri-Food Project in India, who has been executing this, what have we been talking about. So what is your experience on this so far? What are the kind of challenges you see? And what kind of, lessons you learn from this kind of study? How do you apply them? And how do
Sure.
you-
Before I start, let me also say I'm not a student of Dr. Verma, but yes, I would want to congratulate you on the release of this study, and I think it's a harbinger to all the work that is going on under the TEEB Agri-Food Initiative in India. So the TEEB Agri-Food Initiative, it's across 12 countries at the moment, but in India, it's particularly looking at organic farming and agroforestry and how scaling this could both provide socioeconomic and environmental benefits. And obviously, we're valuing these. But before I, go down deep dive into what the challenges are, just kind of how UNEP works is, as per its strategic objectives, it's climate action, nature action, and action against pollution. So these are these three sort of verticals that UNEP works in, and an enabling program or a foundational program is one like TEEB, because it cuts across all three verticals. It informs all these three verticals, and therefore, when it comes down to national implementation, we're having to look at cross-sectoral discussions, especially when we're talking about, say, for example, implementation of the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, especially looking at Target 14, removing harmful subsidies, redirecting them, and also your Global Biodiversity Fund. A large portion of this is actually the redirection of these harmful subsidies, largely from the agriculture sector. So, as you might want to let me go to the TEEB framework and its application, and what we do in terms of the guidance that is provided is that you start off with determining policy entry points within the national context. And this is where you have a lot of debates in terms of what would be the right and appropriate sort of application of the TEEB framework. So in our context, we have this is where a little bit of that strategic thinking is required, and there are trade-offs here. You might want to partner with, say, experts who are good at modeling, biophysical modeling, and valuation, and then there is also the larger sort of perspective where you partner with government institutions to actually build those capacities for them to then mainstream biodiversity and ecosystem service valuation into policy making. So, for us, at least in India, we've chosen to work with government institutions, build their capacities to actually then undertake valuation studies. So, at this moment, we're working in three different states. In Uttar Pradesh and Uttarakhand, they are different sort of agroecological sort of zones. We are also, demographic pressures are different, and obviously what they prioritize in terms of what needs to be valued will actually change as per the government policies that are there. For example, in Uttarakhand, you have the Uttarakhand Vision 2030 document, which basically says organic farming, 100% coverage of organic farming in the state by 2030. That's the vision. But is that achievable given the sort of hill districts, given the plains? So there's and what the sort of sort of intervention in terms of what exactly is the penetration of the interventions on organic farming in Uttarakhand, it's very small. 36% is what they say in the hill districts, but obviously that is also been overshadowed by a lot of use of chemical pesticides. So organic farming there is also compromised. And as you were also mentioning, in terms of the landscape, until and unless you're not converting the entire landscape, is it truly organic? Because you have, runoffs that impact, downstream. You're impacting the produce, and will have chemical residues if the whole landscape's not converted. So yes, there have been these sort of discourses around with the state governments in terms of how to actually move it forward. But coming back to the study, we're studying these, and there are vital data gaps in terms of the need for, biophysical modeling and for valuation that is actually required. And a lot of it at this point of time has to actually come through primary surveys. So that's one major constraint in going ahead with valuation studies. For example, agroforestry, we don't have agroforestry data disaggregated at the district level or even at the state level. And so, if you're going to start saying, okay, we're going to take wastelands and use wastelands for, you know, penetrating with agroforestry interventions, then what is the current existing baseline that we start to actually work from? So, that level of disaggregated data at the spatial level that you're looking at, if you're looking at a local level, at a panchayat level, do we have the disaggregated data to actually then model out of that? That's non-exist. I wouldn't say non-existent, but hasn't been captured. So a lot of our efforts have had to has gone into actually digitization of those areas which have, agroforestry going on within the districts we're working in. And say, for example, also on organic farming, you have a lot of these elements. I think Dr. Verma mentioned 90 different elements of the four capitals that were actually mentioned. And obviously, you are not going to be able to capture all, analyze all 90 elements. So you have to prioritize those. Even the ones that are prioritized, there are data gaps within those. Say, for example, on organic farming, um, in terms of the sort of application rates at the district level, that sort of data is not available. And therefore, policymakers then question, okay, how have you done the modeling? Where have you got the data from? So there's a little bit of a pushback sometimes because the data is not available, but we have to look at, collating this. MOSPI becomes very important to this, in terms of the national accounts on environment that they are developing many different several national accounts that are there, but that needs to actually be informed from the ground, so that some of these analyses actually become easier to actually undertake. Then on the other front is capacities, as I was talking about. There's that entire trade-off where either you're working with expert institutions who are able to deliver these valuation studies, or you're trying to build capacities. We've gone the route where the studies have been undertaken by government institutions who built that capacity up. And today, I'm proud to say this, but the Regional Advisory Committee for ICAR, they have basically said, this is something that's been done at the district level. We would like to do it across all agroclimatic zones in India. So there is power in doing these studies, and it actually, bringing out the hidden costs of agriculture to the environment, and obviously also showing what the benefits are. Um, Another thing, I mean, there's been so many multiple discussions that have been going on here that I would want to contribute to, but at the end of the day, I'm saying another thing is that is very important for us was also looking at what national priorities are on land restoration. So under UNCCD, a restoration of 26 million hectares. The NDC on increasing forest and tree cover, and then the big part is also reflected in the India's food systems pathway is enhancement of income and livelihood. So basically that is something that this study also captures well. So I think we can definitely bring together our studies to actually make a case for TCA in India. So yeah, with that I'll
Thank you, Ruben. Thank you. Now, my next question was how to internalize this into policy, but you answered that to some extent. So, in the interest of time, when it's a fag end of the day, everybody is so tired and stuff. Maybe otherwise, I also feel guilty if I've not really opened the floor for one or two questions at least. So it's important. If somebody has a pressing question, please do. Then I will hand over the floor to Dr. Hussain. He could have the final word.
Yeah, my name is Shailesh, and again, I'm a student of Burma, ma'am. I work with Intellicap, which is a consulting and advisory firm. It's not a question, but I think the issue is very, very complicated. While the study throws a lot of light on sustainable agriculture and the economic value and other things, I think the recommendations are also pretty good. The main thing is that despite whatever we have discussed, there are so many issues which need to be resolved, and it is not the same as what we did in Green Revolution. It was, I would say, multiple times more simpler in Green Revolution. At present, the kind of crisis that we are looking at, it's very, very complicated. I'll just give an issue that it requires a systems approach, and everyone talked about it. But it requires a systems approach even in terms of land. We are not looking at the kind of nutrient cycle which will basically be required. And if you look at the trend, Jagjit did mention about various trends which we are looking at 2030, but you look at the trend of livestock, you look at the trend in fisheries, and in many locations, for example, in Sundarbans, agriculture and fisheries is so much intertwined that one growth in fisheries is going to decline agriculture productivity. So we are talking about ecosystems interacting with each other and having an impact of that. So we'll have to look at at multiple layers. So it's not only economic aspect but also the ecological systems that we'll have to look at. Someone talked about the private common lands. But when we look at common lands, we have a history of working on common lands with the same kind of approach that we work on private lands, and which has failed, right? So we can't do afforestation on common lands because common land is used by pastoralists, or let's say villagers, as pasture lands. So if we are looking at it, we'll have to look at multiple issues, and it is not going to be very easy. So that's my submission.
Thank you. I'm Mansi. I'm from the Good Food Institute, India. We work on alternative proteins, essentially. Dr. Siraj Hussain, of course, knows us and graced us at the summit last year. So we work in alternative proteins, essentially sustainable, affordable, nutritious alternatives to animal-based meat, eggs, and dairy. And I think I've been attending the sessions here since morning, and maybe it's a little pivot from everything we've spoken about, but when we're talking about climate change, deforestation, ecological crisis, it just baffles me that we don't talk about livestock at all and animal agriculture. We're talking about 14% emissions from agriculture. Over 70% of that is from animal agriculture. So just if anybody has any thoughts on that as to why that is not in the ambit of the climate narrative, of the food systems transformation narrative, yet at these platforms where there is meat and dairy being served in the lunches and there's no conversation around it. I understand it's a sensitive subject. Food is incredibly personal. And sometimes it's difficult to engage with those religious cultural connotations that come with it, but just thoughts from anybody on the panel on where you stand on that. Thank you.
You're spot on. This is one thing, this is a missing link, definitely, when you talk about the impacts of climate change. Another one is on plantations as well. We don't really have much of kind of research going on there. I'll stop here. Maybe one of you could respond over this.
I may not be able to talk about entire livestock, but as far as the fisheries sector is concerned, I think that's the one of the most eco-friendly ones among the meat, the whole category. Because water is existing, so you capture fisheries especially. And it has been providing a very, very valuable protein, nourishment to millions of vulnerable people where buying vegetable may be more expensive than getting a fish today, because whatever they capture, partly it's consumed by them, partly it is sold by them. So I think we should have a holistic view on this, not just differentiating meat and non-meat. Even among the meat categories there are eco-friendly ones. I categorize fisheries as one of them. Maybe aquaculture side, yes. If excessive, we go for excessive aquaculture and intensive kind of aquaculture, definitely that's not environment friendly. But somewhere now, yeah, vegan, this thing and all, organic meat farming also is one of the areas which is being focused on. So even the fisheries or livestock based schemes also talk about that, though it's little different from plant based foods. And now similar to chicken or something, lab chicken and all those things are coming up. I think lots of focus is now on vegan kind of nutrition and all that. But still, personally feel that there should be room for everything, all these things. You can't totally rule out, saying that this is, it leaves a lot of environmental footprint, so it should be banned or it should be reduced. I think that is an extreme view. So we need to balance all these things. And there are millions who depend on non-vegetarian diet, and there may be certain things which cannot be replaced by vegetarian diet. Maybe certain particular elements or particular kind of nutrition. So I personally feel that there should be room for everything, but anything in excess is bad.
If I can just add a little, this is so. Firstly, I think it's a very important point to bring up. I remember just a couple of months ago we were having a lot of conversations around this in the Shakti Foundation's annual work plan meeting, and we were discussing various pathways for reducing emissions. And clearly, in the land sector, the largest set of emissions is from livestock. I do want to mention that there are several considerations for livestock in our country, and one of them is meat production. There is also milk, which is a major driver. And having worked in forestry for a large part of my working career, a lot of forest fringe communities just keep livestock as a income guarantee to be used someday. And so the major challenge of livestock there is on deforestation and animal health, not actually in meat production. So, and then of course the meat production is going up. So I think it's a combination of challenges, and this sector definitely needs to be looked at from a perspective of one, more efficient livestock utilization, more efficient livestock varieties, but also better management of livestock. I do want to mention that we've actually working on a project with Shakti Foundation on analyzing pathways for mitigation in the land sector, which are the most effective pathways for India. And we're actually focusing on livestock as a category there. So we'd love to engage with you to get your views on this, because if we have to take that 14% to minus 14%, there's no way it can happen without livestock. And you're absolutely right, about 68% of all those emissions are livestock. So very important sector.
Just a quick one. These two are very important topics. First of all, common lands, yes. It is a challenge, not today, but it has been a challenge for years as well. And we have to really figure out in terms of what could be the role of community institutions in terms of common land management, or else it's not going to work. No matter how much we have policies, it ultimately comes down at the community levels to effectively manage it, right? And there are cases where communities have come together. There is a community governance system which have really rehabilitated the common lands towards productive use. Yeah. So I think that's probably the food for thought. Around livestock, I won't say it's completely absent in the policy dialogues. If you look at this entire national mission on natural farming, one of the thing is, if the farmer have to move from conventional to nature-based solutions, they have to have livestock, right? And interestingly, the apathy of the system is, if you look at the small and marginal farmers everywhere in India, there is a reduction in the population of livestock, right? But this is now being sort of encouraged. For example, you have this Gobardhan scheme, which talks about can we integrate livestock? How can we effectively integrate livestock in this entire transformation towards natural farming, right? Coming to the mitigation benefits or emission benefits, at the policy levels, we haven't even really talked about mitigation, emission benefits from agriculture sector as a whole. It's totally missing. And probably this is our job as a group to really look at, first of all, having these workable, feasible solutions. There is this feedstock management solutions in India. A lot of NGOs are working on it. There are a lot of solutions around feedstock management abroad, which reduces methane emissions from from livestock, right? So we really need to first showcase where are the additional benefits, emission benefits from the agriculture sector. What are the models to incentivize these benefits? Carbon markets, scope 3 emissions, enterprise models, whatsoever it is. And then probably there would be needed a lot of advocacy efforts to really start talking about emission benefits from agriculture sector. So we're still not there, but I think we are in the right path. We will be there very soon.
Sorry, I just wanted to actually comment on the national mission on natural farming and the requirement of livestock, because what we're seeing up in Uttarakhand is also, as you rightly mentioned, declining trends in livestock, and how that actually plays into you have producing on-farm inputs for natural farming. That's also a discourse that is ongoing. So in terms of agroforestry and fodder producing species, planting those within the hill districts, that's something that needs to be considered. So there are these integrated organic farming system models developed by ICAR, IIFSR, as well as CAFRI. So several of these. Now, does this actually get scaled up, and what are the benefits of scaling these up? That's something also to be looked at, and the TEEB framework can definitely do that as well.
Okay, I'm sure you all agree that we have a very stimulating discussion. Certainly, we wish we had more time to go for second round of questions, but unfortunately, we don't have. And I'm just waiting for Dr. Hussain to come back. And oh, is that? Oh, yeah, maybe.
Thank you. That's great that I have another opportunity. This opportunity to ask this question. Sorry?
You're not Dr. Student. You're a student.
No. But we have been reading a lot about what Dr. Verma has been doing. So, in a way, indirect student would say. I think what needs to happen is we are trying to go beyond the per hectare yield and making things relatively more complex. Because the new thinking on greenness or what is invisible is relatively more complex thinking. So definitely the things are not as simple as they were in the Green Revolution. We need to be much more nuanced, context sensitive. Maybe the wholesale practice approach across India will not work. We need to be more agroecologically sensitive to what decisions are taken, or what incentives are provided. This also requires much more headspace from the decision makers. It was easier earlier for the decision makers in the government, quicker discussions, simpler decisions. Now the headspace is going down. Everyone is much more busy, but the conversation is getting much more complex. I'm worried I think the nature of engagement with the decision makers and the way we inform them needs to change. A lot of you have been also in the spaces. Dr. Verma said you informed Finance Commission's way of thinking. So what is our take on how does this, what should be the change in the engagement process with the decision makers, in the informing process and the capacitation process of the decision makers? Because what we need is ability to delve in complexity and make decisions in complexity, which is very different the kind of capacities we needed in green times of green revolution. Yeah, so that sense of urgency is also missing. That potentially also makes the headspace even less available.
The strategy that we've employed is, setting up a project steering committee that's co-chaired by the Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare, and the ministry co-chaired by and the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. So what we really kind of looked at was, what are the needs of the government in this particular space, and what would they like that application of the TEEB framework, where would they like it to be applied, and how would they like it to be applied. So I think, while this entire conversation is getting more complex, there are certain interventions and certain insights that are required by the government to actually shift policy. And that's where I think, cross-sectoral sort of discussions, interministerial discussions, also, say, for example, with the Ministry of Health and the whole One Health initiative, also looking at the Ministry of Rural Development. A lot of these discussions have to happen across ministries, and to actually provide that platform to then provide key insights to how agricultural policy is formed. That is, I think, what we've tried to do with the initiative here in India. So I think just largely, I think that's where the setup that's needed to actually take this discourse forward.
Very quickly, my own experience of working with, first of all, foresters for the past 25 years. I remember going to them and explaining about these values. So Varna will definitely endorse. They would say, what kind of abstract values talking about, I mean, I became laughing stock many a times of talking about something that doesn't exist. The thing is, we had demonstrated through our example of our work that these values do exist. You don't see them. Invisible, getting parked here and there. We had to trace down the entire pathway to see what route they follow, where they get finally landed, who is using them. Gradually, by first of all inculcating an appreciation about these values, a lot of consultation, a lot of demonstration, a lot of round tables. Gradually, when the value for carbon came in the market, realized yes, value can exist. Value for water conservation came into being. We have markets for landscape values, for biodiversity. Many things have come into being gradually. So when that's what whether one likes it or not. I mean, ecological economists. I say that I'm notorious for, and all ecological economists are notorious for putting value on whatever exists on Earth. So it does make sense, because any language you use, any narrative you use, any textual information you use, people would not understand. It's like a story. But the moment something converts into numbers, it does the magic. It does the trick. It gives you visibility in terms of these numbers, the cost of it, the benefit from it. And I'm very proud to say that our study on tiger conservation, working on the value of habitat of tiger reserves, being quoted by Prime Minister very, very many platforms. Mr. Modi quoted it many a times, saying that tiger reserves are engines of economic growth. The way we demonstrated the value of a rupee invested in tiger reserves leads to how many times returns in terms of ecosystem services. That's how graduated it happened. And Finance Commission is another good example of convincing. It was very, very difficult. We had arduous time. Sopan was part of the 14 and 15 Finance Commission studies. How much we had to explain, calculate, demonstrate, not just value in terms of numbers, but qualitative, expressions as well. Everything can't be measured in numbers. Things can be measured in many other ways as well. There's a TEEP's tagline, measuring what you manage. So that's what we tried to convince, the way we tried to convince the policymakers. That's what I'm trying to say, the way we made the case of green bonus of forest, why not for agricultural sector as well? So I think we will, with the efforts of such illustrious people, I'm so happy to receive such enriched, inputs. And the glory that you might see on my face is because of these brilliant students around. So I take a lot of benefit of existence of that. Yeah, thank you. Another interesting thing that we also experienced explaining, and I think Uttarakhand government has taken lead in taking inputs or support from of our studies. Again, Sapan was part of it, and we interact a lot with Jagjit, Naveen, and we are now, I'm so happy that we are colleagues now. That's what gives a maximum happiness, satisfaction to a teacher, that gradually it so happens that but you're teaching. This is a multiplier effect of my teaching. I could say that I am a pure economist. I want to get things multiplied. What I give them, I get multiple time returns of their work. They are, glorious people around. The people know them about by their credentials, as Vapan rightly said. Not just because they're my students. Yes, they are my students. It's a matter of get right for me. Charu and Parul now, Kaira. Anyway, so the study we had done for Uttarakhand government on working out the gross ecosystem product value. You must understand, if you want to manage your ecosystems, you must know the wealth of ecosystem, the value of wealth of ecosystems. So, of course, the World Bank has got wealth accounting framework. We have a system of nominal economic accounting by International Statistical Division. So, we worked out the value of gross ecosystem product for forestry sector in Uttarakhand. It was greatly used by them for making the case with the Finance Commission. For many other platforms, they use the case. And now we will be getting engaged in doing the work for the entire set of ecosystems in Uttarakhand government. The whole landscape of ecosystems will be valued to understand what is your wealth. Accordingly, decide about value or cost required for its maintenance. As I said, we know the value of our house and a household or a house, and we decide about value of depreciation, value of maintenance. And that's how you must put a maintenance cost for environment. That's what is the idea of doing all kind of valuation exercise. If you know the value of contribution to agriculture sector in true way, you must know how much investment should go back in the sector. This is a kind of a base. If you want to sell your house, you get your value assessed. Similarly, this is the household of nature. You must get its value assessed. Accordingly, you can decide about its rental value, its cost of maintenance, its depreciation, compensation, rewards, like that. This is what's the meaning of the worth or value of doing this kind of assessment. It takes time to convince something for which no payment existed yesterday. I'm asking for a compensation or a payment. It will take time for us to convince the buyer, the user of that particular service. It happened in forestry sector. Why not? It can happen in agriculture.
Thank you.
To your query, this is from a bureaucrat side because yes, constant and continuous engagement has to happen because I also have been working on ACIR projects. I really like the way they try to take forward, the inputs or outcomes, how they can be mainstreamed into policies, maybe at state level or at country level. They try to engage with the policymakers at different levels. And not just policymakers. It should not be confined to only bureaucracy. Academicians, researchers, they are also important because they keep the subject alive. And so it will have a multiplier effect, and it comes from that side, it comes from this side. For whatever benefits they want to go for it, they keep it alive, and somewhere something comes up, they try to incorporate these inputs or outcomes as inputs and the observations as inputs. So what I feel is there is nothing to be discouraged. You have to the keep on the practitioners and other than bureaucrats, but you want to do it on a scale, you have to engage with them, and it will happen. Not all bureaucrats are insensitive, and not even though they are busy. In fact, I can quote my experience. Yes, day-to-day things, they totally cloud your mind, and it's very difficult to bring focus onto certain things. Only when it is, brought on your head, then okay, things would move. Because lots of urgencies and emergencies keep coming up. But if somebody else brings that, I would be very happy. Yes, to be associated with them, like Dr. Madhu Verma, she came up with one proposal. We want to do case studies. Why case study? It's not just to document and showcase this is my success story. You bring out lots of observations and you bring the things into limelight. People who are not aware of the sector also will come to know by reading that case study. So yes, we immediately, and some other organization comes up, some individual comes up, certain things, which are really important. Somewhere, this knowledge will not get lost. It may not be in a direct way at times, but indirectly, definitely it gets into the system. That much I can assure because I have been working with academicians, researchers, and NGOs, and other policy institutes.
Thank you. Let's take it as a last word and call it a day. Thank you so much. Thank you, panelists.